Hey everyone, it's Lori Silverman with episode 13 of Level Up with Lori. Today, my guest should be familiar to you. Robert Vane has been with me before. The topic of our session today is called Want to Close the Gap Between Analytics IT and the Business? Working on Symptoms Will Not Solve This. So welcome, everyone. No matter where you may be in the world, what I'd love for you to do is to introduce yourself, say hi, kind of like Robert's doing. Tell us you're here, tell us you're listening, tell us where you're from, and your job title if you want to do that. We just want to know who's with us today so that we can kind of track what sorts of questions we might get. In terms of the setup for this particular topic today, I wanted to reflect on a couple of posts that I've seen over the last few weeks and months that talk about this gap between the business and strategy and IT and analytics and other people who are kind of sitting over here. And the things that I saw were comments like, well, you know, the business needs to learn digital and data literacy. And, oh, the data folks need to learn how to speak the language of the business. And they need to understand strategy. And, oh, maybe the rewards framework isn't working. Or maybe people aren't being held accountable. Or maybe there's bias that's creeping in terms of how people are approaching situations. Or maybe even what we need to do is create another new role to be the bridge between these two groups. And then there were lots of comments on, well, maybe what this is telling us is that the culture of organizations needs to shift. And what dawned on me as I was looking at all of these different comments was that they're all about people. They're not about the organization or its processes and systems. And what it caused me to reflect on is that when I was in my mid-20s, I had the opportunity to go hear W. Edwards Deming speak. I paid my own way to go hear him for an entire week. And one of the things that really stood out for me from that week, that it took me a while to kind of grasp and understand and then bring back to my organization, because the hospital I was working at knew nothing about what I was doing. I did this on my vacation time, was that it's not about the people. I believe that each and every one of you who are listening in with us today, and again, if you're just joining us, please tell us who you are and where you're from. But it's not about you. We are all really great people, and we all come to organizations wanting to do our best at everything that we touch. And sometimes what happens is that over time, systems and processes get built up in organizations unknowingly and unwittingly that make it very difficult for us to do our jobs. And that can, in fact, cause this fissure between IT, data, analytics, and the business and the strategy of the organization. And so, hey, Nicole, thanks for joining us from the UK. Good to see you again. So what we want to talk about today is more about not the people piece of it, like you're all good people, but what are those systems and structures and processes from Robert's perspective that keep us from, hey, Robbie, nice to have you with us too. We got a lot of people from the UK joining us. Robert, it must be your colleagues.
Perfect time.
Yeah, it is perfect time in the evening. That we need to start thinking about that it's not about us, but it's about what we're setting up in organizations that we need to reflect on. So, Robert, thank you for joining me again today for another really interesting conversation.
Thanks for inviting me back. Yeah, is it unusual to be on twice? Am I the first one to be on twice?
I wish I could say that, but my colleague, colleague Karen Dietz has been on, I think, 3 times. So
I'm not that special then.
Yeah, so you're getting up there in terms of numbers, but thank you for joining us again today. You and I have had a number of conversations. I mean, we've done a previous show. We've offline. We talk quite frequently, both by video and also by LinkedIn and messaging and things. And one of the things that you've shared with me over and over and over again that I'd like to explore more with you is that one of the real issues that's causing this fissure, this gap between these different parts of the business, and that's actually causing it to worsen, is what you call an application-centric mindset. So I was wondering if you could kind of start us off by talking about what you meant by that.
Yeah, I mean, it's just one of the root causes, but it's a really, really big one because the application centric mindset has been something that's been cultivating and has driven most of IT for an awfully long time. People tend to deal with application portfolios, and there's lots of other alternatives that in theory could be chosen, but they're not, because it's very easy for people to sell applications to you because you have the flashy screens and the salespeople come in and it's filling a certain need. But in some ways it's a root cause problem here, because once you actually have that application, that mindset of basically separating everything out into silos, and those hard walls that basically that appear from that, you get lots of symptoms happening, and those symptoms then start to have consequences. So you end up with IT building on IT. So, for example, you have the whole industry around integration and data warehousing, and a lot of those sort of downstream IT activities have sprung up because of this mindset. And if we had a more process-based mindset, then in theory those things might not exist, because the process would take care of those things. So so the mindset in a lot of ways drives basically what is happening here. And this one I think has got a little bit too dangerous. It's got a little bit too entrenched. So what you have is basically almost like a construction model of the IT estate that is just working against you all the time.
So give us an example of what you mean by that, where it's like they're building up these silos, they're building up these applications, and it's actually causing more harm than good.
Well, I mean, it's well documented, really. So you have scenarios where you have the typical construction of an application is you have a database which is configured just for that application. You'll then have a set of almost like foundational plumbing on top of that, which is specific to that application. So in other words, other applications can't use it and tap into it. Okay. Yeah, then you basically have lots of sort of code that basically deals with bits of process and things that happens on top. Then you'll have a UI which is incredibly probably forms based. It's not normally workflow based. It's normally primarily forms based. So the interaction with the business is kind of almost like these little tunnels that basically you go through. Yeah. And then that feeds into this incredibly siloed structure underneath, which is purpose built for that one thing. Obviously, ERP tried to fix that by basically saying we do everything, but that was a little rubbish. That never worked. It's just you cannot simulate every single business in one system like that. Businesses work differently. The processes are differently. You can't force everybody to the same process, because then everybody does the same thing. Your competitive advantage is completely gone. It just doesn't make sense. So that's kind of where we are. We have these silos, and right. around these silos are incredibly hard walls. And what's happened is that a number of other IT disciplines have then formed around that. So we've basically tried. We've gone from ETL. Data streaming. We have APIs coming in that are kind of built around the side of the application, but all you're doing is punching holes in the wall. You certainly wouldn't build a house that way, would you? You wouldn't basically build a solid wall and then punch a few bricks out to actually see what's inside. It just doesn't make sense. And these things are code. They are things that you have to write. Some of these things are provided, but the number of projects that I worked on where the standard APIs, you can kind of use them, but the whole project is all about basically then changing the APIs and putting APIs on top of APIs, and it's like, oh man, come on, this whole process of having these separate entities and then punching holes and stringing spaghetti between them, it's just not working. It's creating an ungovernable IT estate, effectively.
Well, so I mean, I actually get a visualization of that. I can see like if I were to have pipes here in front of me, right? That's what you're talking about in these pipes. When you say that they have very hard walls, meaning that they're almost impermeable unless you punch a hole into them, and whether or not you're allowed to punch a hole into them. So then I assume that's a data governance issue about whether or not you're allowed to do that. And then I've got all these silos, and yes, there may be applications like ERP that are meant to link together what you've said, and I kind of see like this string going through the holes of all of these different things, these different silos, trying to link them all together, and that may or may not work for us. I just want to welcome a few more people. And by the way, if you're with us, please tell us who you are, where you're from. Nitya has joined us. Paul Bailing has joined us. Hambing has joined us. Thank you so much for joining us today live. But so what's the problem then? So then I have these silos, and I have to string the spaghetti through them. And how does that cause more issues with connectivity to the business? But I'm also assuming connectivity from application to application. Yes?
Well, yeah. I mean, the question here is then who governs it all? Who actually designs it all? Who actually goes through the process of actually making all this work? And a number of disciplines have also almost like symptomatic disciplines have already come out of this as well. So we have things like digital transformation, which is trying to basically make these applications customer friendly. So that's basically popped out the fact that they weren't customer friendly in the first place. So you keep the applications there, but you try and put this customer friendly layer on it. But then you still have to have the hard walls to get through. So and certainly, and this is why so many digital transformations also fail, because the whole foundation underneath is basically just not set up to do that. But I've also noticed as well a number of technologies that emerge, which are almost like land grabs. I think quite a lot of the biggest proponents of that at the moment is the data industry.
Yeah. So hold on that before you go there, because I want to come back to something else that you said. And Joanna, thank you for joining us from Barcelona. And talk to me about, you said these aren't connected to business process.
Oh yeah. So if you can imagine
what. Back to that before you go further.
Yeah, certainly. If you can imagine if the Valhalla that you're actually sort of heading towards, and I wrote an article in Lights on Data, which basically lists those sort of 10 Valhallas that we're actually looking for. So have a look for that. We're not going to go into all those today, but the idea is that if your basic construction of your business systems, not your IT systems, your business systems, are primarily based on business communication, on flow, event management, and these and business language and all that sort of things. That's what we're going to try and head for. But what's happening at the moment is that the industry is creating the opposite of that. It's creating the highly specialized, highly technical, highly unconnected, highly non-process integrated application-centric landscape. So you're moving away from what you're trying to get to. What you're trying to get to is a business which has process harmony, synergy of roles, all those fabulous things, and all the things that you talk about the ability to actually then have decision intelligence built in.
Right.
Informed choices happening as you're basically doing your work. All these sort of things are virtually impossible under the construction that we've got at the moment. So that construction has to be broken down and rebuilt in a more process-centric way, in a more event-driven way, and it's very difficult to do that with the applications in place. I mean, it can be done, but it's very difficult to do it because you still have these hard walls you've got to get around.
Right, but I think we have to, and by the way, for those of you who are listening in, you are welcome at any point in time to ask any questions that you have of Robert on what he's saying, and to explore more in depth the comments that he's making. This is an interactive show, so I look forward to those comments from you. So stay with that for just a second for me, because you said it's almost impossible to, if you have this application perspective, to do what you need to do on the business side. But what if I am in an organization where all of these applications have been set up and they are siloed? What is something that I can do to start to shift that perspective? Because I'm assuming that people are on here, are folks who aren't in control. I mean, they're not in control of an entire IT function, or they're not in control of an entire technology function. So how do I, as an individual, even start to broach that conversation?
Well, it's interesting because there was a company that I worked for about a decade ago that that literally just said enough. And this was a utility basically in the UK, and they just basically said, no, we've had enough. Nothing's basically working together. All our primary processes, like all the things they have to do, like house move, incredibly important basically for a utility to track basically moving houses and swapping accounts around, were virtually impossible. But they had all the data there. So what this was just a particular set of IT individuals who decided that no, actually we're not going to do it this way anymore. And if anybody asks us to buy an application for each thing, we're just going to say no, that's not what we're going to do it, because what we're doing is a process. So these individuals actually invested in it was fairly clunky, because most BPM sort of things are clunky at the moment because they're underinvested. That's the problem. Right. Because we're not doing it that way. If we were investing in them, it would be a lot easier. Yeah. So they basically said, no, we're going to put a framework in. We're going to play around with it. We're going to learn how to use it, and then when the next basically thing comes in, the next requirement comes in, which is very process led, very process driven, very human, lots of interactions. We're going to build it in this framework, and we're not going to buy an application.
Oh, and how did that go over inside the organization when they did that?
I don't think they cared, to be honest, that much. No. One of the good things about them doing that is they started actually prototyping these things pretty quickly, and they were actually in the snap. You know, if you're going to buy an application, you may get a demo. You don't see everything, right? But they were able to actually prototype pretty much a fully functional business system within a full process within a week or so. Very quickly, and then show it to the business community, and they of course went, "This is great." I mean, we don't like the way it looks, particularly because it was a bit clunky, right. But in terms of what it's doing, we love it. So they made it slightly prettier, and they did some alterations to the BPM framework, and they started investing in that, and it was making a big difference because a lot of their core processes, the house move, a lot of their network management, because obviously hugely key to the utility is the ability to actually manage your network of assets. And this was a water company, and they were getting to the stage where they almost had that Valhalla of house move cracked. Unfortunately, I'd left by then, but they were working so close to it. And they had network management literally down to the centimeter, where some utilities are basically, well, somewhere around here, dig a hole sort of thing. But these guys had geographic and spatial awareness, because they're down to literally down to the centimeter. So they knew exactly where the pipe was. You know what I mean?
So before you go on with that, I just want to ask you a question, and my apologies for the interruption. So what was the question? Remind us again about the question that they asked themselves up front to make the decision not to be application driven.
Because they recognized that particular requirement was a process. It was an event centric, business led, process led requirement, and therefore buying a forms application for that, where the process is almost arbitrary, right, to the actual application, wasn't going to work.
Got it. So now I want to go to two questions from our audience members. Nicole says, what are your thoughts on the role of enterprise architecture in all of this?
Well, they should be the glue, in theory.
Explain what you mean by being the glue.
So the enterprise architect should be the glue, the people who set the principles of how we do this. So the enterprise architects that are principle based and don't actually choose solutions. In other words, they're not basically there just as portfolio managers. Will set principles and say, for this type of requirement, this is the shape of the solution you use. And that's what they need to be doing. They need to be interjecting. And when the business says, oh, we want to buy that application over there, but there's a similar one over here, and all you're actually doing is a process around it. Then, and if they had the foresight, you would say, to put some kind of workflow framework in place, so the first project doesn't have to actually buy it, because that's what stops it most of the time. It's follow the money. Yep. If that capability is in place, which is what enterprise architecture is supposed to do, it's supposed to put in enterprise capabilities. It's supposed to say, what do we need in terms of architecture, capabilities, IT, people, organizational structures, all these things, to basically reach the organization's goals. And for me, it seems ridiculous that most medium to large companies don't have some kind of enterprise workflow framework within their capability stack. Some kind of prototype the process, refine it, even possibly have it executing from the metadata as well, which is the best way to go. I mean, that's the end game,
right?
But where the business people can create a model and they have the system working at the same time. That's the end game that we're all trying to get to. But with that sort of capability in place, then you can start making choices to say, no, actually, we're not going to create this. We're not going to buy this application because actually it's only a 40% fit to what we want.
Right. Right.
And by the time we've actually gone through the MVP process of putting it in, it's probably down to 35% now because we'll have run out of time and money and all those sort of things.
Right.
And there's this horrible negative cycle where everybody is now chasing MVP and everybody's replacing application with application. And every time you do it, you're possibly lucky to get the same thing that you started with. But what you don't get is all the good stuff. And what you don't get is all the stuff you didn't know about was happening in the original place.
Well, but
right.
So I'm sorry for interjecting. So what you're really saying to us is that we need to shift our mindset, that the sorts of focusing on business process and the flow of the business, because I want to get into a question that Robbie's asking, the flow of the business and the value added by that flow of the business, and let that lead. That's what I'm hearing you say. Let that lead. Don't let the applications lead. And what's happened is, at least, my experiences are that years ago, that the business process always led. It always led. And at some point, what you're telling us is that the application focus took over. And this is still important, but what Robbie's asking is, she's saying is by a BPM framework, are you meaning a workflow management tool? And is that what you're meaning?
Well, I would start with a workflow management methodology first. And then if you start with the methodology first, you need to make sure that you cover all the elements of workflow. So all the things you need. So you need the process analytics built in. You need the ability to escalate, nice inboxes, continuous pipeline management, all these features basically that you actually want. So you need a methodology that basically says, these are all the things that we want the workflow to do, and then look out there and buy a framework that then delivers that.
Right.
And the more business intuitive that framework is, the more the business can pretty much write their own processes and have them execute. The more you can then federate that activity. So you're not dealing with an IT department basically banging their head against a brick wall, only be able to do one thing every 6 months. You have 10,000 business people basically helping themselves to write their own process. Obviously, there is then the architecture function, should we say, then becomes like the Jiminy Cricket of that process. So it's how do we govern the business helping themselves?
Right.
So how do we control the business vocabulary? How do we process? How do we make sure that people aren't creating the same process 50 times when they could be using the same process? All these sort of things then become part of that governance need. And the good thing there is when you start getting that that whole process of thinking around how do we make processes more reusable? How do we make language more reusable? How do we make data structure more reusable? You end up managing less. So you end up basically with less IT doing more, which again is the great thing to do, because at the moment what's happening is you've got the other side happening, where the IT machine is basically saying more IT, more tech, more data, more, and that's where we are at the moment. And we have these hype cycles, and nothing seems to get fixed.
Right. So what would
I think that's a broken system. I think that's a completely broken system, and what we have to do is almost like deconstruct the IT machine and reconstruct it to actually serve the business. And that's when that's when the disconnect will start to disappear.
Right,
because
but that's a pretty hard thing for people to do as an individual. What Robbie was saying is, to her, this makes sense, and that this has been done at a place that she worked at. So I want you to follow up on something, and then I want to ask you a couple other questions. One is, you said the IT people then will end up doing different things and more. And what is it that you envision IT people doing instead of this?
Well, that's interesting, isn't it? Not a lot. So I mean, IT generally has two functions in most organizations. The first one is keep the lights on,
Right.
which is make sure the servers are humming and all those sort of things. But quite a lot of that is actually being farmed out to the cloud. So somebody else is keeping the lights on.
Right.
So so the kind of like sort of that accountability is gone. The rest of it is all this project work, all this capital transformation. So IT transformation. Now, if a lot of that IT transformation, all the simple stuff, especially, is being done by the business themselves, with an architecture function, making sure that basically that's all governed and people and sensible things are happening within that framework. IT then gets to do all the fun stuff.
Like what? And then I'm going to ask you a question that came in. Like what?
So IT gets to do all the fun stuff. So IT gets to do all the areas where artificial intelligence and ML actually will make a difference, because it's something you do have to code. Yeah, it's an algorithm you have to write because it's too complex for a business rule or something like that. So and also the things like the business intelligence and big data and all that kind of stuff. Most of it can be dealt with effectively with tribal operational insight. So insight's a bad word. You know what I'm saying? But if your business process has a choice, if that choice is informed by a graphic, then effectively you a lot of traditional data warehousing BI is gone. It's already in your process.
Right, it's in your process, and the people who are doing the work, as you were saying earlier, the people who need to do decision intelligence work then control and are empowered to do what they need to do within their own auspices. And I think that and I'm probably going to pronounce your first name wrong. Is it Juha Pekka said to us, does the hype around being data driven disturb us from being business driven, or do you see the two coexisting? Would being business driven and data inspired be a better combination in terms of pointing out the importance of those two?
Well, yeah, back to the original point we were making a few minutes ago. The IT can become very self-serving,
right?
I think, and again, so we have a hype around being data driven, but it's the data people that want people to be data driven. It's not the business people don't want to be data driven. They just want to make the decisions.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So they want to be able to define the process of making decisions, and obviously that's your expertise area, Laurie. And if that can be quite nicely broken down into a number of business rules and a number of simple manipulations of data to create a data set that gives me that answer, and the framework is intuitive enough for the business people to do that themselves. Most of that day-to-day IT need, that dependency on IT to do everything, to write code for everything, and whenever a new problem comes, for some reason somebody writes a new language. We have a problem with applications being siloed. So then we basically create data warehouses, and that becomes big data. And now all of a sudden we have lots and lots of data, and the languages that we've used before don't work on lots of data, but we created data. So we create a new set of languages which then works on huge amounts of data. Well, what if those huge amounts of data weren't needed in the first place? Do we need the language? Probably not. So,
right. Well, because we're layering complexity on top of this, and I do want to come back.
Symptom on symptom. Yeah.
I know, that's what I'm saying, is complexity. But I think you and I together, and some of the folks who are listening in today may not have heard shows that I've done in the past. So one of the paradigms that I've talked about that Robert's referring to is, I don't think we should be focused on data at all. I think we should be focused on decisioning. And if we're focused on putting into place a step-by-step robust method to help people make smarter, better decisions and organizations, there'll be a pull for the data, not a push for the data. Because right now the data is being pushed to people and they don't know what to do with it, and they're not making better decisions. But Robert, I think what you're talking about is another mental mindset shift, right? Which is from an application focus back to the fundamentals, and the fundamentals are business process, right? Am I hearing you correctly? And then my next question is, on top of that, is there another transformational piece within that I haven't heard or that we haven't picked up on yet?
Okay. So one point I do want to make is that obviously your decision intelligence is all about the parts of the process that require a decision or choice or some kind of intervention. Yeah. So am I making the right intervention at the right time? Then the rest of it is just the automation or the human input to a series of events that basically are going to happen anyway. Yeah. So obviously you need to be able to cover both of those. Okay. Do not say anything that sounds like SIRI with your mobile phone in the room. Okay. That's my tip. That's my tip for the day. Okay. But when you use this process focus model, you can then go wider than that, because actually processes are fairly discrete. So there tend to be a set of events that start with some kind of stimulus in, have a flow, may have optional things, and then have a number of endpoints. Yeah. But that's not what makes business competitive over other ones. What makes business competitive is the long transactions.
Yes.
Is the value flows, is the customer to customer, or the procure to pay cycles, all these sort of things are what actually make businesses more competitive. And they have slightly different decision points because they're slightly higher in terms of abstraction, should we say? They're not quite as tribal. So we now have a functional level of decision intelligence that we need to put in there to basically say, is our long transaction supporting our business? Yeah. So is our business model of the whole end-to-end doing that? And then you can start going further than that. So we're now talking about going from where we are now, which is if you're lucky, a kind of a semantic level of interoperability between all these things,
right?
To organizational wide process interoperability, to moving then into like a synergy, which then gives you almost like a synergy of processes. And then you start building like a cultural interoperability, because with these processes as they are, you can then reach out to your customers and your partners and things like that. Yeah. And then the ultimate there is basically that you then effectively have global interoperability, where an organization within a certain industry can basically work with any organization within an industry, because effectively that they are interoperable by design. Yeah. So that's the right up there.
Well, and I would add to that, because this is an area where early on in my career I did a tremendous amount of work. It's not just this value chain and the ability of it to move out this particular direction to consumers and to society and in general, but it's also the interconnectedness of cross-functional processes within the organization, because it's aligned. Yes, exactly. People only talk about alignment, and I'm like, there's more than alignment. It's about the interweaving of these pieces. It's not just like this or this, it's both. And Hampton said, and I would like him to clarify this for us. The comment is they do not understand metrics most of the time, and I'm wondering if you can tell us more about what you mean before we address that. Because I think what Robert and I are saying is that it's not about the metrics. It's about the decisions. And even, I mean, there have been other shows that I've done where we've talked about why dashboards are problematic, and we want to focus more on the decisions than on the dashboards with the metrics themselves. But I think what you're saying here is, if, we've got this gap. So let's come back to the beginning, because I want to take you to another place. We've got this gap. We've got this fissure between the business and IT and data and analytics. And one of the ways to start closing that gap is to stop this application-centric mindset and to start moving more to understanding business process, which, by the way, for those of you who are BAs on this call or do business process management, this is absolutely critical to where you want to think about positioning yourselves in the future with enterprise architecture, because they may need
huge opportunity.
right, hugely with this. But you're also talking about, and I think you've started to raise this briefly, I want to come back to a tangent that you raised, which is that then solutions start to be not of enterprise scope, right? They're just specific to a need. And is that correct? And or that the technology language, you mentioned this too, you said all these languages of all these silos with all these applications are different.
And they have to have connection points, and those connection points are more code. So that's an interesting one, that, because again, this is kind of back to
digital. I mean, some people tell me that digital thread solves this. So
digital thread is a long transaction, effectively, but it's one of these long transactions. That's what a digital thread is. But the way it's been framed, it's basically the digitizing of a long transaction. But these long transactions are not just digital; they also have human interventions. They have insight. They have intuition points. They have all these other. They have. It's too simple to say that basically you can create a data thread and then solve effectively a long transaction. They're just more. They're more into. It's multidiscipline. You can't do it with data. You can't do everything with data. People should start realizing that you cannot do everything with data as much as you try. And this is back to the point that I started off a little while ago about these land grabs that I'm seeing. So if you don't mind me sort of going into this a little bit. So
yeah, to do that, and then I'm going to come back to a question that Robbie's raised.
Yeah, fine. So these interwoven symptoms that basically meant that you're creating technology solutions to solve other technology solutions and choices and mindsets. There are a number of ones out there that are emerging that are based on effectively, if we remodel all the data in this way, then effectively we'll cure the world with semantics and all these sort of things. And again, that's not going to work because data is only 30% of the problem. So you can't build up all your knowledge base just from effectively going through a technical translation of all those silos into a single format. It's this logic will fix everything. It won't. Not all business is logical. So it's very difficult. It's just not going to work that way. You need a more. The knowledge is in the business people and the processes and the events that they do, and each business, even within the same industry, will have a cultural level of interoperability, which means they approach that differently because their value is what's the word for it? The way they do things effectively is different. The value that they get from the things is different. So the processes are different, and the actors are different, and it's all differently configured. If it basically means that every time that we basically have this problem, we have to go into every single business, we have to then go and extract all this stuff out of the silos, remodel it into a different format, try and figure out exactly through AI what the process was that we're trying to do in the first place, which for me again is very strange, because I think AI will be great at doing things that are not a process we already do. Mm-hmm. So because for me AI is actually creating something that is a process that we don't do.
Okay.
You know what I'm saying? So you create an algorithm to basically create something new.
Right.
Not to try and rebuild or replicate a process that we already do that effectively we've lost because we've dragged everything out of it. We've dragged it out. We've lost the context. We've remodeled it, and therefore we have to rebuild it somehow. Again, it's IT basically constantly building on itself and not actually changing the end result. So I just can't see where the value in a lot of these symptomatic IT solutions are basically given to business.
Right, but what it's like taking a building. So I watch in the US, I watch HGTV, and I watch a lot of these home remodeling shows because I just find them to be absolutely fascinating. But what it's almost like here is instead of remodeling the house because we see the problem, we just add on another piece and 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 another piece, and we hope that takes care of the problem. But if you watch these shows, one of the things that I've been observant of is that they strip it back. At some point in time, they just say, that's it, we're done. We're just going to strip the house back to it. They call it its bones. And then we're going to rebuild it from there. And that's what I think you're talking about. Robbie's asked a question, and this is something that I know is near and dear to your heart as well. She said, do you feel Agile software development practices have made the application-focused problem worse?
So that twitch has come back. That nervous twitch. She said, let me say the A word. It's actually not necessarily Agile. It's the software first paradigm. And I know obviously Agile, basically the manifesto. That's on manifesto. It's probably worse than Agile itself. Being Agile is not a problem. Being proactive and agile and quick and governed and accountable is what we want. Yeah.
Right.
But building everything with software first is not going to help us. It'll help sell lots of IT, but it won't necessarily help the business. I mean, moving back again to you, Laurie,
right.
to your area. What we're trying to look for here is basically a method and a framework which basically allows you to support both what's happened in history, so historical stuff, what's happening now, the operations
right.
and decisions now, and what basically is going to be in the future.
Correct.
Yeah, and we need to be able to go business operations, choices, decisions, insights, that horrible word again. We need to be able to cover all that seamlessly. So with the same method, we need to be able to cope with what's happened historically, and therefore, are there any historical trends left after COVID-19 that we can actually actually use? What's happening now, and also not just the future that we think is going to happen, but in theory start modeling multiple futures.
Correct.
Yeah.
Well, and I think that Robbie's come back, and I want to come back to this Agile piece. Yeah. And she said it was Agile with a small a, rather than Agile with a big A. But I know that you have talked with me about that Agile comes from less code, fewer specialisms, less technology, doing more. So take off on that a little bit before we look at some other of these kind of symptoms and root cause issues that are causing this gap to have happened.
I mean, this is technology. One of the key things in TOGAF is one of the key principles in TOGAF is control technical diversity, and I think it must be the one principle that nobody reads for some reason. I mean, I've created a whole platform, a whole methodology, using one language to the whole thing. One language to the whole thing. I don't need 55 different languages, because most languages, most software languages basically have core features and core components. They can iterate, they can loop, they can while, they can all these things basically are in there. There are specific specialism languages that are being created for things like big data, and the graph network people have basically created their own query language. So now we have like 3 or 4 query languages out there as well. So is this all necessary, really? I mean, to me, it just doesn't make sense. All we're doing is creating technology dependency on every single chain of the business ecosystem, and every single area of the business ecosystem appears to have a different technology dependency now, and nobody can agree effectively on any standards there. There's no regulation with the IT industry. It's a machine that literally just sells almost like false hope in a lot of ways. So it basically sells here is the next greatest thing. Here's Python, here's all these sort of things. It will solve all Python will solve all your analytics problems. No, it won't. It won't do that, because the problem with your analytics is the fact that you're not engaging with the business to understand what decisions they want to make in the first place.
Right.
So, and no coding language will basically fix that. Yeah. So that there's a whole machine out there which is predisposed to build almost like more dependency, a more needy business. I mean, and this is how the IT consultancies make the money, don't they?
Right.
Billable hours. Let's face it.
Right.
And the amount of times basically where the software developers offshore basically have been waiting they're already pre-allocated. When somebody signs the contract, and everybody actually knows what's happening. And if you don't get them working within the next, actually doing things within the first month, basically, all of a sudden the solution changes because the developers aren't busy. It's like it's like the tail wagging the dog. It's just not good. It's not a good way of doing things. And that's why I'm a firm believer that we need to push a lot of this stuff, a lot of this simple stuff. Capturing something in a screen and writing it to a database can be generated. It can be modeled. This isn't the hard stuff. Yeah. And if it can be modeled, a business person can do it. Yeah. As long as the governance is around it. Yeah. There needs to be governance around it. We need to make sure that they're actually using language that basically predefined business language to actually do that, and predefined ways. There needs to be a framework which deals all that and hides all the IP underneath.
But I want to come back to what you've just said there. It has to be a business framework. It has to be a business language. It's not about the language of what comes in each of the individual applications. And as Nicole just said, this benefits the tech companies as they can sell more solutions. And what I think I have a fear of going forward is that a lot of these tech companies are moving into managed service. So now they're going to move into selling consulting services. And what I was thinking about this morning as I was getting ready for this show is, I remember a time when I worked in a refinery a number of years ago, and the plant manager came to me as being one of the consultants, and he said, I've got 12 consulting firms running around in here, and they're all trying to solve different problems. They're all speaking a different language. And I want to say, now let's add that component on top of these individual application silos and the complexity it's going to be, because now every piece of the business is going to be consulted to by a different tech company with a different language. And what we're going to get is well, I don't want to say an explosion, but we certainly aren't going to see a systems coordinated approach to doing anything. What we're going to see is that this fissure is not just going to be between IT and the business. It's going to be between different pieces of the business and each other, and between different parts of technology and each other, and between different.
Already is. Already is.
Right,
We're already there.
It's so fractured, right? It's completely disaggregated, which I think, to your point, is, to me, the common, from my perspective, and we have different perspectives coming at this, one of the common languages is the language of decision making. Just, how do we go about making decisions? What you're talking about is the common language related to solutioning, correct? Or common language
and data and knowledge, effectively. Yeah. So when if you were to plunge us into back to the Stone Age and turn off the electricity, and people had to go back to doing things on paper. Believe me, the business people would not construct their paper systems in the same way that basically vendors sell their applications. It just would. They would actually use, they would use their own language. If they had to do it on paper, they would use their own language on the paper. And what's happened over, it must be over 4 or 5 decades now, is that all these applications that have come on, and a lot of the mindset in terms of things like normalization, which is great for creating a silo database, but for creating all the data, all the places where information is stored, which may not just be in a database. Doing that doesn't work at the enterprise level. This is again the scalability issue coming in.
Correct.
So and we also have a number of architectural disciplines that are predisposed towards what I call divide and conquer. So breaking things down, finding an absolute truth over there, and then working with that truth in that context. And then repeating that in lots of places, and functionally separating things. And what happens is then you have an IT landscape that if you just cannot scale that to the enterprise. You can't govern that at the enterprise level. Effectively, you just can't do it. And there's all sorts of other issues about you've got to follow the money, because a lot of industries like utilities, they are capital project based.
Right.
So literally will be a department saying, I want that application and that's all I want. So there are cultural issues that you need to get across as well. But that, for me, what was enterprise architecture was designed to be, the job of the enterprise architecture function was to set those high level principles by which people would then start choosing solutions, and because everybody's choosing the same sort of frameworks for the same sort of problems, eventually you get synergy moving forwards. That was the whole, for me, the whole reason of enterprise architecture. And as an enterprise architect myself, and I've been in scenarios where I've actually started enterprise architecture practices. Some have done really well, some have failed purely because of that follow the money capital project. The project manager effectively has more power than the CIO sort of scenario. So it can be very difficult.
Yeah, so let's do that conversation for the last few minutes of our show. So what can people do? I mean, so a lot of folks, like I said, who are on here are individuals who might be business analysts, who might be information architects, who might be solution architects, engineers, software engineers. What can they do given all of this? Because I think it's one thing for us to spend our time talking about, here are the symptoms and here's what's causing this. And oh, by the way, me teaching people how to be data literate, me teaching, me trying to fix the culture of the organization, me trying to teach IT, the business of the business, may or may not help. These are like band-aids. And what you've been talking about for the last 45 minutes with us is not just the band-aid. How do we actually solve it so that I don't have to continue to put on band-aids? And Paul has just asked, are there organizations effectively integrating IT into BPM so that silos are avoided by design and IT is equally accountable to cost metrics related to solution implementation?
As I mentioned, you may have just joined. I'm not sure, Paul. I mentioned the utility in Scotland, basically where they were turning that corner. And they had actually put that BPM. It was Aqualogic, I think they had their Oracle BPM suite they had going, and they put that framework in place and they played around with it, and they prototyped a few things in it to make sure it would work, and then they just started choosing it for the right reasons. So if there was a specific application requirement that was very static, yes, they probably would have bought an application. But if it was a process centric thing they were trying to do, they used effectively that platform. So I've seen it work really well. And again, but as I said before, it's very easy to sell applications. It's very easy for technology vendors to spin out the salesman and basically say, this is our application solution for MRP or whatever, or manufacturing, and it does everything that you need to do in manufacturing. And you're signing the dotted line before you realize, actually, no, it doesn't. It actually only does 60 or 70% of what we want to do with manufacturing, and we have to then build the rest. And that's just a cycle that continues.
Right. I want to come back, though, to the second part of his question, which is, have you seen IT equally accountable to the cost metrics related to solution implementation? And if so, where might you have an example?
The cost metrics of what in particular? So of using BPM?
To solution implementation is what he was asking.
So I'm not completely understanding the question there. So I'm not sure what the accountability is to who and what the cost metrics are for.
If an application is purchased, there are cost metrics that are associated with it, but oftentimes IT is not responsible. Business pays for it; someone else does. So IT can say, "Not my response." I'm not accountable. I didn't buy it. Whatever. So, maybe this is something we need to be thinking about for the future, where IT is accountable and does have to put skin in the game, and so that if there is no return on the investment, that they are actually as liable for that as the businesses, because right now that's not necessarily the case.
So I wouldn't actually put that in IT's bucket at all. What I would do is I would move enterprise architecture into the business function, and have enterprise architecture get slapped around the face if they do not govern their solution. If they do not govern the solution layer underneath them. Enterprise architects don't deal with solutions; they deal with capabilities and principles and all. Solution architects deal with solutions, but if solution architects aren't following EA guidelines, then that's an architectural function issue for me. But there's also the business architecture role in there. It's incredibly important, because the business architecture people need to be saying, well, hang on a second, I don't even want you to start doing this yet, because we haven't even locked the process down of what the business wants to do yet. So why are we buying an application based on an unknown process? And it's these sort of things. It's this multidisciplinary set of things that need to happen.
Right, but I think that what you've just raised are two really critical pieces. One is, can we shift enterprise architecture to working within the business, right? And are there gates before an application is purchased that they and business process management and business analysts or someone else are saying, wait a minute, you haven't gone through the gates yet. We need to be thinking through this. Anka has asked a question, and it is, how can organizations implement successful data governance and essentially an enterprise data, a master data later in the process after so many enterprise solutions have been in operations for so many years? It's the most difficult challenge many chief data officers have when establishing a new data governance vertical to serve data across the enterprise.
Yeah, that's because they're dealing it with the data. Data is the whole solution, basically. I don't actually recognize data governance at all. I think it's effectively enterprise governance that you need. Data is one of the aspects of enterprise governance. You cannot do data governance without process governance, or the other aspects of governance. And master data also is, for me, okay, probably a little bit too harsh here. So if you're not careful, we end up basically with functional silos, which is your application you've got at the moment. And what you end up is effectively with something different, which is a domain silo, which effectively is your master data management application. And sometimes it doesn't take you forward that much, because what you've actually done is because you've not actually removed all the areas and functionality of that domain completely out of those applications, so they just actually don't use them anymore, and put them into the single place, which means that you're controlling your one single set of data. If you still basically have this situation where you're having to copy data from and synchronize data with all those satellite applications from your MDMs, then you just basically created more spaghetti and another silo. And also a rather complicated key management issue as well. So, it does work for some organizations. It doesn't work for other ones. But one of the principles I find that you need to move forwards with an MDM solution, which is effectively the tool, not master data management, which is the information architecture around that. Which effectively is not tool dependent. You can do master data management from an architectural point of view really well, and then screw it up completely by basically putting the wrong framework and tool in place. So that whole process is, you need to be very careful, basically, because you will end up just creating another silo and not actually realizing the benefit, and just basically chewing up loads of money, because what you haven't done is actually implemented a method of master data management. Now, if you think about it, if you go,
I'm going to shut you up there, only because we're about 2 minutes before closing, and there are a couple other comments, so I know we could go on this topic forever. But I think that what you're saying is that, and Anka reinforces this. She says, yes, there are many domain silos in financial institutions serving with data various business teams. And the challenge we have is, as I've said in a little bit different context, chief data officers need to be called chief decision officers. And when that shifts, then we'll start thinking about the enterprise governance. And that is huge. That's exactly the question I asked you earlier. What's another transformational mindset we need to make? Jennifer is going to end us for today. It says, it's definitely cultural and needs education around leaders and senior management and how to think about solutions for long-term multi-departmental and not just quick and cheap and siloed. Understand how it impacts the overall business and essence of how we solve needs. I've seen a lot of band-aid applications in business to the point of crippling a business's ability to move and respond to the market instead of really building a systematic feedback loop that supplements daily business interactions. And that is exactly what we've been talking about throughout all of today. I think that's like an amazing summary. So in the 60 seconds we have left, what's one thought Robert, that you would like to leave with our audience today before we sign off?
Okay, believe you can do it. You don't need permission to go out there and start doing the right things. So just start challenging, questioning this status quo, and driving a more business process and holistic and federated and business-driven approach. And in about 10 years, basically, your company will be the best in the world.
Yes, there is someone.
It takes a while. Sorry, it's not going to happen next week. It's going to take 10 years, but you'll get there.
Well, I think you have to stay the course is what you're saying. It's perseverance, right?
Yeah.
There is a question we're not going to be able to get to, but Robert, if you could think about answering it when this goes up online, it's how do you fight the typical CEO knows a good application issue when it doesn't matter what other people say against buying another app. So we're going to leave that question for LinkedIn conversation for all of you. And we've gotten some thanks from people. Robert, thank you so much, because I think that you've really started to sketch out what the real issues are. And they're not about the people. It's about what we're being sold and the hype and what we need to start questioning.
And the mindset.
And the mindset, absolutely. And that there are several different transformations that have to happen for all the pieces that you and I have been talking about for the past weeks and months to come together to actually synergize an organization and for value to be created and to close that gap between IT analytics and the business strategy. Thank you so much, folks, for joining us today. This video will be available on YouTube as well as on LinkedIn. So if you'd like to have other people watch it, please have them reach out in that way. Robert, I'll have your LinkedIn information up as well so people know how to contact you on YouTube.
Thank you.
And they can reach out and ask you more questions. And you mentioned an article. So if you can give me the link to that, we'll put that up as well. How does that sound?
Okay, well, sounds great.
All right.
Great.
Hey, thanks everyone.
Nice to
Have a
talk to you.
great day.
Bye, everybody.